Test 1, 2. I forgot to tell him talking to Mike. My bad. I said I forgot to tell you to turn this mic on right here. And I can't find my glasses. We had our meeting because we're meeting. Let me see. Can't be no worse than what I'm seeing with these.
Man, I don't know.
It's worse than what I'm seeing with these. I laid my gas case stamp. I might be at my job on it. As we wrap up this chapter, because we're finishing up this chapter tonight, where did we stop at? 7 and 16. Huh? 16th verse, 7 chapters. Like it's loud. The things I do for Ron. How about now? Let me know. Let me know if it's still distorted. Can you hear my voice? Can, give it just a minute. If it ain't clear, that means I got to go downstairs and press a button. Okay, but anyway, 7 in what chapter? What verse? 16. Paul, y'all know what we're dealing with. Paul is dealing with these very intimate and personal relationships throughout these chapters of Corinthians. And now he's dealing with the issues of marriage and divorce and the constitution thereof. I think the last thing we talked about was up here when he was talking about being bound. If an unbeliever and all that type of stuff want to leave, not being bound, because God have called us to peace, which validates the fact that God won't lock you into somebody for the rest of your life that's destroying every bit of God peace that you have. He's not that type of God. For what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband, or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? But as God has distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called everyone, so let him walk, and so ordain I in all churches. If you back up a few scriptures, Paul wanted to make it clear on one particular thing. I think for the most part, Paul is trying to appeal to good spiritual sense. Good spiritual sense, because before Paul got into this entire spiel, he made it clear. He says, I speak this not by the law. He said, but because of the authority that's been given to me through my relationship with Christ. And he goes on to let you know good common sense things and good spiritual common sense, not our own common sense, because our own common sense ain't so common sometimes, but good spiritual. Paul is saying here, if somebody's got their mind made up, they're not a believer, and they do not want to believe, and this is costing you safety, harm, peace he spoke about directly here. God is not his will to lock you into something dangerous, possibly even deadly, for the rest of your life because of the law. And he goes on through many other scriptures to make you understand that you already broke the law. The law cannot save you. And he's saying now, how do you know if you stay in this particularly dangerous situation that it's going to come out right? He says you don't. Verse number, 16? Read 16, somebody who can see. He says this because a few verses before, he said if an unbeliever wants to stay, don't kick him out. He said because one is sanctified by the other. But he turns right around and said, but if that unbeliever wants to go, let him jet, because you don't know where that person's heart really is. And you can't swear that you're going to save them. You don't know if this undying commitment you have is going to be beneficial. It could be pushing that person even further away. So he says, if they want to go, let them go. But as God, read 17. But as God hath as God has distributed to every man. You know, there's a scripture that says God has given every man a measure of faith. Here's some Quentin 2 and 10 for you. I might actually be able to dig up some scriptures and substantiate this. But other than somebody that's dealing with severe mental disabilities or something like that, I don't think there's a single person in their sound mind that don't know when God is trying to tell them something. I think there's a ton of people who ignore it. I don't think there's a certain person that can't say that God haven't told you a way to go. Most of us can look back on periods of our life and see where, man, I knew I should have did that. I felt it, but I didn't, and this happened. A lot of times, that's God speaking to us, telling us the right way to go, but we're so busy holding on to what we got. I think what Paul is saying, he said, but God has distributed to every man. I don't think it ain't God's will that nobody walk in a lack of understanding. As the Lord hath called everyone, so let him walk. As God has told you, as God has called you, walk according to that calling. Some people won't be able to hear because we're in a culture now. Is it still distorted? It was still distorted. We're in a culture now where people don't think church is necessary. They don't think preachers is necessary, and I ain't gonna lie. There's been a lot of preachers got a lot to do with that. Been a lot of preachers got a lot to do with why the next generations got issues with trust in the church. But that don't mean God is not finding ways and he's not speaking to them. Is any man called being circumcised? Paul is asking a question. Is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become what? Uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision? Let him what? Now, to the religious folk, he just crossed the line. Because one thing we have to know, in their Judean tradition, this was how those that called themselves Jews were perfectly identified separately from those who were not Jews. Now, the Jews certainly knew the difference between the Jews and the Greeks. But I told y'all, everybody that left Egypt was Hebrew. But not everybody that left Egypt became Jews. And not everybody that left Egypt became Israelites. Israelites were those of the promise. Everybody that left there were Hebrews. But not everybody became Jews, because Jews became, that was an identification of their faith, what they believed. Israelites were the promise. And the Israelites were not identified into who? It ain't distorted. It's just real low. Okay, we'll get it. I got a little volume on this thing here now, so we'll get it one way or the other. So the Israelites were a part of the promise. Now he's speaking to the custom of the Jews. If God called you in uncircumcision, you don't have to go get circumcised to prove that God called you. If he called you in circumcision because you were following the law to the letter, he's saying don't go get uncircumcised because of this. Why is he talking about that? He's addressing people right now that has taken what he said and twisted it for their own benefit. Women are going home and no longer wanting to be with their husbands. Husbands have dived into this commitment so deep, trying to follow Paul, they no longer, because Paul said, if it were up to me, y'all would be just like me. I don't want no wife. It's a distraction. He said, but because y'all can't commit, then get you a wife. Well, some of these men at the time, they're trying to prove that they can commit. And Paul is saying, stop it. That's not what I told y'all. Don't change this or change that because you're coming here. Take what God has given you and dedicate it unto the Lord and walk by faith. Whatever he's called you to, walk therein. Paul is trying to break down all of those traditional customs of religion that is serving them no purpose. Circumcision is what? Nothing. And uncircumcision is nothing but the keeping of the commandments of God. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. Hey, somebody find me something real quick. I wrote down a study note here for some reason. I got to remember what it was. Galatians. 5. I see 15. Well, read 5th. Let me read the 5th verse. 5 and the 5th verse. Hold on. I wish I had my glasses. I wish I could see what I got here. And read the 6th one. Mm-hmm. Okay, now I remember why. I remember why I highlighted this. Here's a religious dispute without resolution. Paul is spending all of this time saying, doing everything that you believe Judaism called for is nothing. Not doing it because you think you understand is nothing. In Galatians is validating that. Paul is saying, hear from God. Whatever he tells you to do, that's what you do. And it doesn't always, the thing about commitment to God, it don't always look like religion. As a matter of fact, most of the time it don't look like religion. When you're committing to God, it don't look like religion. I know a lot of religious-looking folk that know very little about God. If you go back and look through the Bible, if you watch Moses' trek, Moses didn't do anything according to how the Moabites would have did it. He didn't do anything the way the Egyptians would have did it. He didn't do anything. He just followed what God told him to do. And nobody understood it that couldn't hear from God. Now, there was a handful of folk that didn't hear from God, but they followed anyway until their understanding came. I don't think Miriam and I don't think their full understanding came until they got stricken. Had to have a situation that put them in a place where they could count on nothing but God, where they could call on nobody but God. And I think this is what Paul want us to be right here. When we're reading that, Paul wants us to know. And here's the endless debate. One group says, let's look at the church for a moment. One group says, in order to prove this relationship with God, when I was growing up, if you were in a holiness church, women, your dress was down to your ankle. Your earrings and your makeup stopped at the door. And I'm talking, we played music at a church one time. You remember? And I already understood their custom. And I had already read the book that said something to the fact of, if you eat meat and your brother don't condemn him for not eating meat. Just don't eat your meat in front of him, because he might take it as spite. And if one don't eat, don't condemn the one that does eat, because it's not about what your relationship with God. I preach all the time, God is a God of condition. He have expectation, but his first expectation that your heart is right. Everything else is your reasonable duty. And that's the only thing Paul is preaching right here. Let God deal with your heart. Everything else is your reasonable duty. But what religion has done is created an entire religious, theological debate. If I'm saved, I'm just always saved, regardless of what I do. Because Paul said, don't change. The other group says, wait a minute, ain't that the same Paul that said, I beseech you that you commit your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, which means separated, which means separated for God's use. Holy and acceptable to God, because that's your reasonable duty. So a whole debate is broke out. In this time it was, do I get circumcised or do I not? Do I keep this heathen wife I got or do I not? Today's date, should I wear dresses or should I not? Did you know there are still holiness apostolic churches to this day that believe that when the book says women don't wear apparel pertaining to men, that it's talking about a dress versus a pair of pants? This is the type of nonsense Paul is speaking against right here in this very text. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was calling. Art thou called being a servant? Care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. You're called being a servant. In the Greek, the term servant applied sometimes as like what we would have called a slave, but as an indentured servant, more like an indentured servant. He said, if you're calling you being a slave, use it. He says, care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it. What did you gain? What did you learn? What did you gather that you can use during this period of time? So if God called you in that situation, don't you know he saw you in that situation? So if he saw you in that situation and he called you anyway, don't you think it was something he saw he could use there?
Yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
you know how man is. Man
Yeah.
feels like they worthy.
This is true. You know what? Part y'all.
Either man got their own mind made up, just like in our meeting.
Mm-hmm.
They could walk and tell you, Pastor, do what you know to do. and
But which is ironic, and I'll tell you why a little bit later on. It reminded me of one of our first 2 or 3 meetings when I first got here,
yeah, but you know,
which was ironic.
you got to do what God say do.
Period. I said it in a meeting about 5 years ago. I didn't come to do what I wanted to do. I come to do what God says do. And if he don't say do it, you can fuss all you want to.
Yeah, because you're going to make a mess
If I do it, it's going to be a mess.
yeah, you do what you want to do.
If I did what I wanted to do,
What seems right to a man is just right.
it's foolish. It's just right to that man.
But it ain't right with God.
See, I already know what the outcome looks like when I do what I want to do. I've seen it.
Right, yeah.
And if you can see your messed up outcomes
Right.
and keep doing it your way,
Oh, my goodness.
that's insanity.
Yeah, that's insane.
Especially when you have discussed this with a God who said, try it my way and watch what I do. And you can clearly see the difference in what he did versus what you did. Why would you go back to doing things your own way?
Moses, even when he had to go the way God told him to leave Egypt.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
He'd been in Egypt 40 years. You know how he knew an easier way to go? Well, God told him to go this way, and everybody, when you're hearing from God, God don't think the way man thinks. We got a way of the way we think.
Mm-hmm.
This right to a man, but it ain't right to God.
No, it's not.
God is justice.
It's not. And it might feel good. It might look good. You might weigh the pros and cons. But I've learned to still wait on the confirmation from God to do what he wants to do. Case in point, when the Lord found me, and there's a part of me that want to say I won't never a real bad person, but my thing, if you want good, you was bad. You know, if you want good, you was bad. Because
You hadn't killed nobody.
I ain't, that I know of. Not that I know of.
But he said when you done one sin, you done done all.
You done done them all. But in that state, I can look back and see this verse right here. Art thou called being a servant, care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. I can look back and see with that state of bondage he found me in, I can about see everything that was negative that I could use for his glory now. Case in point, if you used to be a hustler in the streets, there's still folks out there that need what you got because you remember.
And sad thing be said, sometimes them hustling spirits, you bring them right into church.
You know what? That's what they need to be. Because I'm going to tell you one thing going to happen. It'll get cast out. That negative nature will get cast out or they'll leave. I don't believe somebody looking for God can stay the same. I don't believe you can stand around, because the book says his word won't return void. I don't believe you can get the whole real gospel and stay the same unless God has done something that in his word he said he would do. He said, for this cause I have turned them over to a reprobate mind. In other words, a useless mindset. I haven't allowed Satan to kill him, but I've allowed them to choose the free will of being useless to the kingdom. And God wouldn't have said he turned you over to a reprobate mind if he wouldn't do that. And even that person, I believe, would they be able to come to church? I got a buddy now, I love him with all my life. I love him. I love him with all my heart, but what he's learned about the love that's in Evans Grove now, he can't come regular. I want him to come regular. He'll come, get a little bit, and then he's telling you don't see him for 2 or 3 weeks. He'll come, get a little bit, and then you don't see him for 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't believe you're going to be able to come in here and sit right there evil every week and be comfortable. Because at some point, God's going to speak to you. And he's going to speak to you, then he's going to point you out. And what happens then is those reprobates, they take it as a personal assault and say, you judging me, and they get mad and they leave. And you know what I say? Good riddance. You want to do right, I'm riding with you into the end, no matter what your struggles are. But if you got your mind made up that you just going to mock God, I can't entertain that. Mm-hmm.
You know, because the Bible says you have faith. Faith comes by hearing. And I just don't believe that you can sit at home, don't come to Bible study, don't come to Sunday school. Now, I believe people like Cynthia mom and dad been in church all their life, and they wouldn't miss the Bible study, wouldn't miss Sunday school. And I used to say up in here when I was trying to teach Sunday school, I can't teach them nothing. They said, you be teaching me something, you know, and I couldn't see it. I'm like, you've been in church all your life. Ain't nothing that I could tell you. Because sometimes when people now went for 20 or 30 years, not done something for 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
they be like, ain't nothing a preacher can tell me, because they feel like, when they went from a baby, since
Mm-hmm.
they going to church from a baby all the way home, and still coming here to this day, you now hear it from so many different pastors, you now hear it all, and sometimes they get in their own
Especially when you deal with a bunch of pastors that keep regurgitating the same thing over and over. But what God has taught me is a challenge. I'm going to get to this 21 because I want to talk about the servant thing. But what God has taught me on that note is a challenge. The thing I recognized and I prayed about when I came here, I said, God, like we was talking about at the meeting, I said, I got a bunch of military people in here. I got rejected from the military 2 times, and the 3rd time I didn't want to do what they wanted me to do because the Navy wanted me to get rid of custody of my children so I could go in as a single man with no children. And I couldn't wrap my head around that at that time because all I could think was, my daddy, he left me. I'm not leaving my children. Now, looking back, I should have left them jokers. Looking back, I probably could have went on in. It might have been a process, but once I got on their payroll, adopted my children back. But at the time, I felt like,
I think that's probably what they were telling you to do and stuff, because a lot of times they want you to come in and see.
back in the 80s, they were kicking people out of the military. They were closing down military bases. There hadn't been a major conflict since the soldiers came home from Vietnam. Because Reagan got in there and caused some troubles. I think he messed with Iran. But at the time, they didn't need you to be in the military. They was trying to fix the mess left over from Vietnam. And so the criteria changed, a lot of stuff changed. And if you went to that office, that recruiter office, to go into the military and you had 3 or 4 children already, in the 80s, you canceled that. Matter of fact, it's like that now. We know a girl right now just went to the military. Yeah, she had 3 children or something like that, 4 children. She had to sign legal custody over, just a couple months ago, to her parents before the Army would take her. Yeah, and she signed them over. I think I could have had them, but then again, I might have went over there and got killed without my children being my beneficiary, you know. So I just couldn't wrap my head around it. But I was talking about what you was talking about when people been in church a long time. And then I'm looking at Mother Peggy all in the Hall of Fame. And Lord have mercy, after I heard Deacon Marsh the other day, I had no idea the stuff he did and what he retired from and all that type of stuff. So I said, God, you got me preaching to people way smarter than I am. What am I going to tell them? So what he did was challenge me to keep digging. Like John, you know, John's the smartest man I know. You know, I think John is smarter than John sometimes because he's done so much studying and so much schooling, you know. But he never heard why Abraham would not leave his nephew. You didn't know it.
I didn't know that.
See, and I said, well, God, I've always been curious by nature. But when I see something in this Bible, and it ain't telling me the whole story, my nature, I'm clawing. I got to hear the rest of the story. I found the rest of the story. I didn't know that Abraham, before he was Abraham, you know, I had to find out he got mad with his daddy, Terah, who was not a believer. He served the king. Figure that. Abraham's dad served the king. His daddy told him, them y'all gods right there. Abram says to his dad, where's the God that created us? Terah took him in a room and showed him a bunch of statues and said, these are our gods. Abram tried to feed the gods, made out of wood and metal. So after I told that story the other night and how Abram cut up the gods and then took the sword and put it in the big god's hand, well, he ended up getting thrown in a fiery furnace. And Lot's father got thrown in there with him. Lot's father burned to death because he didn't serve the same God. Abram wanted the true God. So as they looking in the fire, Abraham walking around, well, it was Abram at the time, he walking around in the fire pacing like this. And the fire was burning the ropes off his hands and feet. And soldiers go up to try to get him out. King says, get him out. The soldiers bursted into flames and burned to death. Abram watched his brother burn in the furnace with him. So, and I thought to myself, oh, then I said, I got to authenticate this. Where did this come to find out? These books were in the original writings, and the European church thought it wasn't necessary to keep it. So when people say, well, man, he didn't take God's, you know, what he did was decide what he thought needed to be in there and what didn't. But God is so good, God made those scriptures available now. Why did Lot's wife turn to a pillar of salt? But here's the question, though. What she look back for? She had a couple of kids that didn't come out. She had a couple of children and some in-laws that didn't come out. See, the Bible tells you that Lot had son-in-laws who he was trying to reach, but it never tell you who they were married to. But later it says his daughters that came out with him were virgins and single. So once you start studying, you go, that joker had some children that stayed back in Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot's wife was mourning for her children when she turned around. The problem was God told her not to turn around. But did you know that? No. You knew she turned around, but a lot of churches don't know she turned around. Because so I said that to say, the thing about people getting older, when God places that man on the old, here's the difference between your preacher and your pastor. Your preacher can preach the walls down. He can even teach in some cases. But it's something placed on a pastor who's, understand, he's responsible for your learning. He's responsible for your growth. He's responsible for your understanding, because I'm asking you to go out there and sow seed too. And I can't ask you to go out and sow seed on something you don't understand. The preacher don't get that deep. The preacher understands what he has to do is entertain you on Sunday. I told y'all Sunday is my most off-balance day because I don't know how to put it, but to me on Sunday morning, you know what we should be doing? Sitting down together, eating some food, and discussing dinner because that's what they did on the Sabbath. On Sunday, we should be sitting down, breaking bread, eating. I mean, we do our first Sunday thing, but we should be eating and drinking, discussing God, and praying for one another. But the church developed this system that was taught to them, and it's just been passed down and passed. Now, I'm not saying anything wrong with it, but I'm saying for me, Sunday morning should be bigger than it is. It should be bigger than just listening to me preach about what I want to teach about on Wednesday night. You see what I'm saying? So when we look at these things and we see these people you're talking about, people that have been in church for a lot of years, the first thing that hit my mind is a challenge, okay? Unless they can quote this whole 66 books to me, first of all, I want to know if you add the 14 that got taken out. Because there were 14 books that were here, and they got taken out. So let's go there then. You know what I mean? So you can get the whole understanding. Why? Watch this now. Here's how this ties in with this statement he's making about when God called you in one state. When it says, for he that is called in the Lord being a servant is the Lord's freedman. So whatever state God finds you in, whether it's bondage or not, you free. And whatever state he found you in, he can use you to his glory. I was curious all along, Deacon Boy. I always needed to know how something worked. I always wanted to, even in my terrible street days, when I saw somebody, how's that happening? How do you make that go from this to that state? You know, so I sat down and learned it. Glad I didn't die in it, but I learned it. And everything I put my hands on when I didn't know God, I learned that too. Working on cars. I hate that as much as I do painting. But if a net break down beside the road, and we have, I don't care what it is, unless I got to drop the motor, put a transmission in there, I can probably fix the car because I've always been curious. So imagine how God takes that state that he find you in and use it for his own glory. Somebody might have an issue one day that they don't know how to handle it, and let me help you with it, and somehow we start talking about God. And ministry starts to happen. He's now using what he saw when he saved me in that state to reach out and speak to somebody else. And it's simple, but the funny thing is they didn't understand it in the day sometime, and we don't either. And we caught up in our traditions. We caught up in our traditions. Let's do this right here, because I don't want to be on chapter 7 next week. Let's just read through this, because Paul is basically driving home the simple fact that, number one, the law can't save you. You can't dismiss the law, but it won't save you. God's trying to use you for his own glory. So if you think you're honoring God by going home and firing your whole family, you're not. If you think you're honoring God by saying, I know people who were in the worst situations, right? And for whatever reason, they just ended up breaking up. Marriage was over. Wife went home, honey, I don't want you no more. But baby, please stay. Nope, I don't want you. I'm gone. Pack her bags and she run off with Tyrone. His religion says he got to stay by himself until she dies. That's not the type of God. Paul, he dismissed that up in verse number, I want to say that's verse number 13 or 14 or 15. What is that? He dismissed that way back up. Somebody start reading that verse number 23 or 22. What did I stop? 22. Yeah, start there. Oh, Ron's been asking me about that today. Ron, if you listen, you're the reason I'm streaming in the first place. Um, Paul's talked about being free or being servant. Who the Son set free is free indeed. But when Paul talked about I, Paul, a bondservant to the Lord Jesus Christ, I, Paul, a slave to the Lord Jesus Christ, what he's speaking about is being locked in and committed to the Christ that saved him on the road to Damascus. What Paul means by that is not highs, not lows. That's the scripture where he said that. Not death. He said, nothing shall separate me from the love of God. So when you asked me about that today, Ron, I hope you can hear me. But what Paul means is being locked in by faith to this Christ that he serves. And what Paul is saying right here, let's say if you're in a physical prison and you find the Lord in that prison, because you're no longer in yoke to the bondage of sin, you've been made free, though you still might be in that prison. I hope you understand that, Ron. Keep reading that. Where you at? I don't remember you finished in 22 and 23. Likewise, also he that is called being free is Christ's servant. Ye are bought with a price. Be not, read that now, I can't see. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yet I. Now there he is again. How do y'all take that? He finna give out some unasked for, probably unwanted advice. What's the first thing coming to your mind when he said, now concerning virgin? I don't have no word from the Lord on this. Yet, I'm going to tell you anyway. This statement reminds me of that man you like to watch on the video net. He said, the black church going to get mad with me for saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. You ever seen that guy? And then he go, y'all check this out. And then he shows stuff, and then he come back and offer his own whole spiel on it. Paul is saying the same thing. Now concerning the virgin, I have no commandment of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one that has obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. Go on and read the next one. So to be what? You know what he's talking about, right? See, a lot of times when we say concerning the virgin, we automatically think he's talking about the women. He's talking about them jokers too. I suppose therefore that this is good for the present distress. I say that is good for a man so to be. Keep reading. Mm-hmm. Why? Because if a man find one, he found a good thing, right? People think that Paul is being contrary. But I tell people all the time, he's not talking about, I don't want you to be married. He's saying quit doing this stuff for religious reasons because it won't work. This is what Paul is saying. Paul is trying to destroy all these crazy religious practices because apparently they're hearing what he's saying, but they're not really processing what he's saying. And so he's trying to give them some guidance here based off what he perceives as his spiritual authority to do. So keep on going. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Hold on. Let's do this right here. Stop right there because I said I want to get through this, but I got to expound on this. Not right now. because it's quarter after. But I can't skip over this because he's talking too direct for us not to get a clear understanding. We're going to start back at verse number 27 when we come back. Yeah, because I gotta get through. I got some notes here on that, and we got to talk about that. I don't want to keep y'all here too long, but understanding is very good. And I did tell y'all when we get to 1 Corinthians chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7, we're gonna go kind of slow because he's dealing with a real life fleshly situation. God made man to desire a woman. He made woman to desire a husband. And all of these, by the time we get to Paul, all these God-given things are just messed up and been messed up for a long time. He's preaching this so he can get it straightened out. So instead of me just reading all this, we're going to take one more week on these. One more week. Y'all, again, we're sorry about the delay tonight. I know we didn't get as much as we wanted to get because we're doing the meeting, but I think we're going to meet on a different night, right?
No, I told him still Wednesday gonna work better for me.
Okay.
I think Wednesday just gonna work better for me.
Okay. Okay.